Formula One is a sport in which one of the most important elements for holding competitions is the venues where Formula One cars display their maximum capabilities. And in the more than 75 years of Formula One history, a huge number of circuits have been part of the official and point-scoring calendars of the top category. Some have success and long periods within this tough world, but others not so much, and they end up being abandoned or disappearing permanently. And the mission of this new mini-series will be to tell you about those circuits that left Formula One, why they did so, and whether they might eventually have a chance to host a top category race again. Before we start with this video, a quick clarification. The circuits that appeared in the extinct Formula One circuit series will not be part of this saga. And we will only include the circuits that were part of the 1970 calendar, from now on for the creation of the different chapters of this remake of our series. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the remake of the fate of the circuits that left the world of Formula. To begin with this story, we will have to move to the United States, more precisely to the state of California, to tell you about one of the most beautiful street circuits in the history of the category, which in this case was the Long Beach Street Circuit. From 1976 to 1983, Formula One had a race called the United States Grand Prix West, which was hosted by the Long Beach Street Circuit, a track on the streets of this area that came after two failed attempts to bring more Grand Prix to North America. At this time, the United States already hosted the United States Grand Prix at the Watkins Glen Circuit in New York. However, the circuit faced a severe crisis due to a lack of solvency, being considered a dangerous track and being unattractive for Formula One. So other options within the United States started to be considered for the calendar. Since Formula One wanted a bigger North American presence after two failed attempts to bring F1 to Canada, that's when, in the mid-70s, the offer came that would easily fulfill the mission of having a bigger presence in North America. Our story begins with a person named Chris Polk, a travel agent but also a speed enthusiast who had the idea to create a street race on the streets of Long Beach. He believed this would help the city survive the post-industrial era and compete with other major California cities like San Diego or Los Angeles. At that time, Long Beach had few attractions for tourists. So believing that an auto race would turn this city into the Monaco of the west coast of the United States sounded extremely fanciful. Even so, this person managed to convince the local authorities that holding the race would be quite good for the city. With that, working together, they managed to create a race circuit in the heart of this city, which had a distance of 3.2 kilometers. And by 1975, it had its debut with a Formula 5000 race, which attracted up to 46,000 spectators. It was a resounding success that would allow POC to start negotiations with Formula One to present them with the project of having a Grand Prix in Long Beach. And in just a few months, Formula One would visit this circuit to officially have its competition within the most important calendar in the motorsport world. And the plan that both Puck and the event organizers had devised worked out perfectly. After Mario Andretti's victory in the 1977 edition, Long Beach gained international recognition, sparking its transformation. It became a city visited by major celebrities, a strategic area in the world of adult entertainment. It also began marketing itself as a more tourist-oriented city. As a result, more businesses, restaurants, and hotels eventually arrived, modernizing the city and giving its image a complete turnaround. The circuit was part of Formula One from 1976 to 1983. The track was narrow with close walls, but featured elevation changes, challenging corners, and wide high-speed sections. These features made the circuit an interesting and fun challenge for many drivers, where they also enjoyed the incredible atmosphere that surrounded the entire event. There was never a top winner at this circuit, since each year there was a different winner. But the most successful team in the history of this Grand Prix was Ferrari, achieving 3 victories in 1976, 1978, and 1979. But then, all this historical context leads us to our first question. If the event was a complete success, why did it leave the world of Formula One? After the 1983 edition, Chris Puck, for whom this Grand Prix was created, realized organizing a Formula One race was very costly. The profits that were made were scarce compared to all the money that ended up being invested to hold the races. The Formula One race was not very profitable for the organizers due to transportation costs and the fee demanded by Bernie Ecclestone to organize the event, since it is estimated that the profit was only $100,000 compared to the $6 million that had to be invested to hold the event. Seeing this, Chris Buck convinced the Long Beach authorities to abandon Formula One and instead focus on an American category to thus ensure the survival of this event. Therefore, the decision was made to fully transition from Formula One to the American single-seater category. With this, thus ending the presence of the top category up to the present day as we know it. And once we've resolved the why, let's move on to the question: what happened to this circuit after Formula One left? Due to the city's constant growth, the circuit was remodeled several times during Formula One's 8-year presence. In 1976 and 77 we had one version, then it changed from 78 to 81 and 1983. The layout changed again. Today, more than 40 years after the last Formula One race on this circuit, the track still exists, albeit in a completely different version. It measures 3.1 kilometers, and it goes around the Lock Beach Convention Center, the attractions area of the Pike, and continues crossing Shoreline Drive. And it's used by several American categories that come together at the same time of year to race on this circuit. Mainly International Motorsports Association, the American Endurance category. And above all, the main event is the IndyCar Grand Prix, which has been part of the category since 1983, except in 2020 due to the pandemic. And it's one of the events highlight of the Indy calendar. That still preserves that tradition with motorsport that began in these cities back in 1975. And finally, let's answer the question: can Formula One return to this circuit in the future? Even though Formula One is very obsessed with races in the United States, it's very unlikely that we'll see Long Beach back on the calendar since the track has become too small for the big show. And currently, it has Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile Grade 2 certification. So it would require a huge investment to lengthen the circuit and adapt the facilities to the demands of the top category. This would include creating a paddock and a modern pit lane, resurfacing the circuit, improving the facilities, and probably extending this track quite a bit. Something I see as extremely complicated to actually happen because the circuit already works well with IndyCar. And I'm sure that if Formula One management wanted to bring the category to California, they would go for a street race in Los Angeles, which would give the Grand Prix more visibility. So I see it as very unlikely that Long Beach will have Formula One again. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but at least for now it does seem almost impossible. For the second story of this video, we need to move to a country that is a natural enemy of the United States, historically speaking, the largest country on the planet, and to the place where the 2014 Winter Olympics were held, where the Russian circuit of Sochi is located. From 2014 to 2021, Formula One visited the giant country of Russia to have, on average, until now, its only Grand Prix in its history. And the history of this circuit, this country, and Formula One begins before that mentioned date, in 2014, since Russia's interest in the category was not something new. In the early 20th century, Russia had already organized Grand Prix races in St. Petersburg during the early years of motorsport. And there was interest in having a Soviet round in 1983, which in fact was added to the Formula One world calendar, but it did not take place due to political obstacles. There were several approaches from this country to Formula One to bring the category there at the beginning of the 2000s. In fact, this country was interested in building a circuit at Pulkovo Airport or constructing a permanent circuit in the Molchanovsky district in Moscow. But for one reason or another, these projects always ended up failing. However, a significant turning point for this Grand Prix occurred in 2010 when it debuted in Formula One, a figure who would end up being important for the birth of the Russian Grand Prix. Vitaly Petrov, the first driver from this country to compete in the top category, who would do so with the Renault team. This fueled the desire of Russia and Bernie Ecclestone to finally bring this country together with the category. On October 14, 2010, after numerous negotiations, the Russian Grand Prix was officially announced, set to debut in 2010. And the tourist city of Sochi was chosen as the venue for this Grand Prix, which in fact would host the Winter Olympic Games in January of that year. This location was strategically chosen to highlight the Sochi Olympic Park. This was done to prevent the Olympic facilities from being abandoned after the Games, which is a common occurrence. the government secured a $200 million budget with the contract signed in 2014 until 2020. This circuit would finally debut in Formula One. But in the hearts of many fans around the world, this is remembered as one of the most boring Grand Prix ever. Since the Sochi track was quite flat, as it seemed like a circuit was simply drawn around the different complexes of the Winter Olympic Games, it had asphalt runoff areas that didn't punish mistakes, and in general, the races here tended to be pretty boring. Nevertheless, the Grand Prix received significant government funding, as the country paid among the highest fees to host the event, securing certain privileges. And the public received the race quite well, which led it in 2020 to renew its contract with the category until 2025. But after the 2021 edition, the Grand Prix was no longer held. And this is where a story comes in that many may already know, but also one that not everyone might be aware of. So let's clear up the question. Why did Formula One leave the Sochi Autodrome? The simple answer is that it was due to the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Which, trying not to get too deep into the subject, Russia decided to attack its neighboring country militarily, and that action was not well received by other countries around the world. In response, Russia received numerous sanctions, including being excluded from the Olympics and the Soccer World Cup. Many companies ceased operations in Russia, and obviously Formula One, owned by Americans, was not going to be left behind and unilaterally terminated its contract to avoid being affected by any kind of sanction. However, as I mentioned, this is the simple answer. However, it was already announced that the 2022 Formula One race would be the last one held at the Sochi circuit before all this happened. They wanted to relocate the 2023 Grand Prix to a more strategic location. And the venue for this circuit would be changed so that the Grand Prix would be held at Igora Drive, a permanent circuit that was in the middle of a remodeling process and was going to debut in 2023. So the end of the Sochi Grand Prix had already been announced, but it didn't get the chance to say goodbye because of the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Now, in case you're curious, let's see what happened to the Sochi circuit. Nowadays, this track is known as Sirius Autodrome in honor of the urban settlement Sirius, which was created near the Olympic Park. The track still exists but was shortened from its original length to only 2.3 kilometers long. Many degraded areas of the circuit were removed, along with the abandonment of the international categories. Only a 2.3-kilometer section of the track remained after partial dismantling, although watch out, the full layout still exists. The last race that was seen with the full track dates back to the year 2023 with a local endurance category competition, and nowadays it's only used by some local categories, since Russia still has blockades that don't allow international categories to enter. So the Sochi circuit still exists, but it's only used for track days and Russian motor categories. But then, let's answer the last question this way. Can Sochi and this circuit return to Formula One? Assuming the Russia-Ukraine war ended and blockades on Ukraine were lifted, it seems challenging for the Grand Circles to come back to this circuit in the coming years. As I told you, the original layout still exists and hasn't been destroyed or occupied by any construction or facility. But considering this Grand Prix was moving to Igora Drive for strategic reasons, if we were to talk about a possible return of Russia to the category in the future, when the blockades and sanctions are lifted, it's very likely that Igora Drive will be chosen since its reconstruction and remodeling have been completed, despite the 2023 race cancellation. The only way I could see Sochi returning would be if Igora Drive wasn't available and the Olympic Park circuit had to be adapted again. But these are just assumptions. The reality today is a very complex political issue, and the only reality that exists today is that Russia cannot return to sporting activities in a normal way, and therefore they cannot have a Grand Prix. So at least in the short term, even in the medium or long term. Do you see it as impossible for Russia or this Sochi circuit to return to the world of Formula One? The third circuit in this video forces us to move around Europe again and position ourselves in a track and country that are not well known in Formula One. We will position ourselves in Sweden to get to know the track known as the Scandinavian Raceway. The Scandinavian Raceway, now known as Anderstorp Raceway, is a racing track. From 1973 to 1978, it brought to life the Swedish Grand Prix of Formula One. And the history of the circuit begins in 1965 when three local drivers named Sven Asberg, Ake Bengtsos and Bertold Zanel got together one day for coffee and between conversations and jokes. they thought about creating a track in Sweden that would serve as a test circuit, allowing them to perfect the setups of their different vehicles. What began as a light-hearted discussion turned into a genuine endeavor. These guys followed through on the common idea among friends: let's start a business. They persuaded local businessmen to fund a circuit that would serve as both a racetrack and a landing strip, to be able to cover new commercial routes between the city of Anderstorp and Stockholm and thus provide greater economic growth to the region. All of this plan resulted in the creation of a 4-kilometer track with only 8 turns, featuring a challenging layout that combined not only fast corners with some narrow sections and some bank turns, but also a huge straight that was used as a landing strip. And it was in 1968 that this circuit saw the light with a secret race to celebrate the birth of the newly created Swedish Automobile Club. And it wouldn't be long after this event, and some others also arranged to pursue the ambition of bringing Formula One to this new circuit. To achieve this goal, they made some small modifications to the circuit, where, after this, Sven Asperg went to meet with the category's officials at the 1971 Belgian Grand Prix, and he returned to his country with a Formula One contract to host the first Swedish Grand Prix starting in 1973. His arrival in Formula One coincided with the meteoric rise of local driver Ronnie Peterson, thrilling the fans. Not only to have Formula One in their country, but also to have the chance to see a local driver fighting for victories. When Formula One raced on this circuit, drivers encountered a track that was somewhat dangerous, yet provided entertaining races. And that would be the foundation to eventually also bring the Motorcycle World Championship. The foundation of this Grand Prix was successful, since having 2 Swedish drivers made the public want to attend the races, which were turning out to be a success. But after the 1978 edition, Formula One would leave this circuit forever and never return. But, as facts to take into account, the biggest historical winners of this competition were the South African Jody Scheckter and the Austrian Niki Lauda, who each won this competition twice. But then, if they had a successful event and 2 drivers representing their country in Formula One, why did they stop competing at the Scandinavian Raceway? The answer is extremely simple. Both Ronnie Peterson and Gunnar Nilsson, the 2 drivers who represented Sweden in Formula One, passed away in 1978. Ronnie Peterson in an accident at the Italian Grand Prix, and Gunnar from cancer. So without Swedish drivers representing in the Grand Circus, the public interested in attending the race was smaller and the promoters lost interest in supporting the competition. It was completely removed from the 1979 calendar quietly and practically never returned to this circuit nor to this country. And if you're wondering about its fate, what happened to this racetrack? Well, despite losing Formula One, other categories would continue competing at the Scandinavian Raceway, like the well-known Motorcycle World Championship or different touring car championships. In addition, the track was being renovated to bring it up to modern standards in 1990. With this, they brought the Superbike World Championship and hosted a round of the World Endurance Championship, a 24-hour race in 1993, which turned out to be a disaster. The round was very close to being cancelled due to complaints from local residents that the noise was quite loud. And although this problem could be overcome, a torrential rain made the race a disaster, which in the end would also mean a financial disaster, resulting in the bankruptcy of the Understore Automobile Club. But despite this and many other problems that arose, the circuit managed to keep organizing different competitions that have kept the track alive to this day. It had quite a few international competitions for a while, but due to ongoing complaints about the noise, in the end the government decided that this circuit could only have 22 days of noisy events, being forced to operate only a few races and practically local championships. Although that's true, it's also used for quite a few track day events where anyone can bring their cars and noise control is a bit easier to manage. And although it's pretty clear, let's settle the last question. Could this circuit ever return to Formula One in the future? Absolutely not. There is no interest from Sweden in returning to the category, and this circuit, with all the restrictions it has, because of the excessive noise and its facilities, which are not immediately up to the standards required by Formula One, it makes it impossible to consider a possible return. Just to give you an idea, the track currently has Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile Grade 2 and you need Grade 1 to host the race, so it would require a lot of money. not only to get the circuit up to standard, but also because of the huge investment that would be needed in the city's infrastructure to be able to host the competition, the attending public, the event participants, and to improve the city's mobility in order to have an event of the magnitude of Formula One. In my opinion, if Sweden was interested in Formula One, it would be possible. They would bet on a street circuit in Stockholm before visiting this track. And if a few years ago there was a local driver representing this country on the grid, wasn't there any interest in having a race? I doubt there is any now or in the near future. And to wrap up this video, it's time to travel to South America, to a country that currently has a driver representing it in Formula One. A rich culture and history within the top racing circuit, and where obviously we're talking about Argentina. Argentina has had 3 different periods of its Grand Prix in its own country, at least up to now. From 1953 to 1958 and from 1972 to 1981. And its last stage was held from 1995 until the year 1998. And all editions of the Argentine Grand Prix have been raced on the same circuit. Originally known as the 17th of October racetrack, later as the Buenos Aires City Municipal Racetrack, and more recently as the Oscar and Juan Galvez racetrack. This circuit was created as an initiative by high-profile people within the world of Argentine motorsports, like Luigi Villoresi, the multiple world champion Juan Manuel Fangio, and Jose Froilán González, also a Formula One driver. They wanted Argentina to have a venue where motorsports could be organized more professionally and open up to international competitions. Even though the racing scene in Argentina was quite good and growing a lot. In those years, races were typically held on closed public roads together with President Juan Perón. They saw the only solution, both to have their own racing venue and to bring in more international categories, to create a permanent circuit that would be located in the capital of this country, Buenos Aires. And by March 9, 1952, the circuit was built and inaugurated with a competition called the Perón Cup. And this circuit was named the 17th of October racetrack in honor of Peronist Loyalty Day. A year after this track's creation, largely due to the drive of multiple world champion Juan Manuel Fangio, Argentina already had an international standard racetrack. That's why Formula One would come to this country for its first stage, from 1953 to 1958. After Fangio's retirement, Formula One left this country and would return for a second stage. Between 1971 and 1981, which was quite successful, especially with the presence of the local driver Carlos Reutemann. But by 1982, this circuit would once again leave the category, supposedly due to some political situations related to the drivers' strike at the South African Grand Prix. And the tensions between Argentina and England over the Falklands War. And this is where the last part, at least for now, of the history of Formula One begins, and Argentina as part of the scoring calendars of the top circuit. Since in 1991 a private consortium took control of the Oscar Galvez racetrack, named at that time in honor of the late driver, and they began a renovation to try to bring the circuit up to the standards required by Formula. Because yes, the main intention of the people at the circuit, together with personalities from Argentine motorsport and some members of the country's government, was to bring Formula One back. Argentina managing to secure a 7-year contract, which was originally going to start in 1994 but was delayed to 1995, to finish on time and properly the renovations that were being made to the circuit in the Argentine capital. And in 1995, despite not having an active driver in the category or a team in Formula One, the Grand Circus would return to this country and this circuit with a racetrack packed with fans eager to see the competition that, in 1995, saw Damon Hill's victory, which he would repeat a year later in 1996. In 1997, it saw the driver Jacques Villeneuve from Williams crowned as the winner, and it was the Ferrari man who took the victory, beating the McLaren drivers in the year 1998. But it was right after this edition that Formula One would leave this country and hasn't returned since. You might wonder about a 7-year contract, which would theoretically end in 2001. Because then the big circus stopped racing in Argentina. Well, the quick answer is financial problems. The event was cancelled due to the high hosting fee, circuit owners only recovering their investment through ticket sales, and reports from Argentine media suggesting the racetrack infrastructure was inadequate. The number of people attending the event made Bernie Ecclestone gradually lose interest in having this Grand Prix continue. In order not to lose it, business groups and the government at that time began to negotiate to keep Formula One in this country. but the government wanted the race to be held without any cost to the state. The public investment couldn't ensure the estimated 8 million budget needed at the time. The competition's organization, along with personal disputes between organizers, the government, and racetrack officials, led to the situation. Ultimately, it proved nearly impossible to arrange the 1999 race. As a result, they breached the agreed-upon contract, leading Bernie Ecclestone to remove them from the provisional calendar without hesitation. And that turned out to be the definitive departure of Formula One from this country, at least until these days. Now that we know why Formula One left this country and this circuit, let's answer the next question. What was the fate of the Argentine track? I must admit that 5 years later, I need to correct a serious mistake I made in the original video where I first discussed this topic. When I made this mini-series, I mentioned that the circuit had fallen into a state of neglect. And even though I didn't really mean to say that it's not used or that it's abandoned, what I meant is that the circuit has fallen way behind in terms of infrastructure over time. As years passed, the track was neglected, never renovated or modernized to meet international standards once more. But that was before 2023, the year when a series of renovations to the track and its infrastructure began. In 2023, the circuit was fully repaved, and in 2025, further work will be done on the facilities. The safety of the circuit, renovation of the pit building curbs, and safety of the Buenos Aires venue. Renovation that will be aimed at the circuit obtaining Federación Internacional del Automóvil Grade 2 certification in order to host international events. Although of course the track exists and is still mainly used today for Argentine motorsport categories such as Turismo Carretera 2000 or Formula Nacional Argentina, just to name a few. As well as for enthusiasts who like to use this circuit for their personal use. Although it's true that in international competitions it hasn't had much activity in recent years, the track still exists and is still being used. And so, with all this in mind, let's answer the last question of this video. Can this circuit in particular return to Formula One soon? Well, it's no secret that Argentina and the top category have tried to get back together on several occasions since its departure in 1998. However, projects like the Velocidad Autodrome, the Mar del Plata track, and attempts to bring Formula One back to Buenos Aires have not materialized. However, the current landscape is very different compared to those years. Franco Colapinto, the driver from this country who made it to Formula One at the end of 2024. This has renewed the interest of some people in Argentina in Formula One as new fans from this country have emerged. And obviously, there have also been many fans who had always been there and who are now very excited to have a driver from their country representing them again. This has also rekindled many Argentines' interest in bringing the world's most important motorsport competition back to Argentina. At this point, it's possible to consider Galvez's return to Formula One. But it would require a multi-million-dollar investment to adapt the circuit to the demands of the top category. The track is currently Federación Internacional del Automóvil Grade 4. The renovations aim to upgrade it to Grade 2. This will enable it to expand to more international categories. Although in terms of infrastructure, it will still be behind what's necessary to be in Formula One. But is the interest in bringing the category here serious this time? As some members of the Argentine government are saying, and if the necessary money is provided to adapt the track and pay the fees required to hold the event. It's not impossible for it to return, but obviously it won't be an easy job. It will require time, commitment, and above all, quite a bit of money, but I'm sure that with the right people. And the momentum that Formula One is having in Argentina recently with Franco Colapinto makes you think that it's not impossible to imagine this category returning to this circuit in the future, a circuit that breathes so much history in Formula One. So, in the end, only time will tell if after so many failed projects, Argentina can finally make its return happen. After more than 25 years since the last Argentine Grand Prix was held. But with this, we conclude the first video in our mini-series about the fate of the Formula One circuits that were left behind. What did you think of this remake we just released? Which other circuits would you like us to discuss? The story of why they left Formula One and their fate after hosting the category. And also tell me if you would like any of the circuits we've talked about today to eventually return to Formula One. Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. In conclusion, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this with your friends. I also invite you to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. The links are in this video's description. And I'll see you soon for more content here on your Skyline Racing channel. Thanks for watching. Bye.